I have come so close to quitting my job in construction more than once due to its bigoted culture. However, the strategies that I've been able to implement over time have allowed me to continue to thrive in the industry. As a wider diversity of people continue to join the workforce and start to pursue careers in male-dominated industries, gaps in the policies and culture of these companies really start to show. Women have started to become more vocal regarding the difficulties faced while navigating these male-dominated industries, and I believe we have also become more empowered to improve them and ensure we all have the resources to create positive experiences and succeed in the industry. Today, we're going to go through some of the challenges that women face within the construction industry, with some of my own stories and examples of what I've been able to implement to improve my experience. Hey there, fellow STEM femmes, welcome to Building Her Way, a podcast created to empower underrepresented groups working in male-dominated industries to break down barriers and challenge the status quo as we work towards creating a more inclusive and equitable future. My name is Monique Elizabeth, a senior environmental advisor working in the construction industry with a Bachelor of Civil and Environmental Engineering. And this is one of my 3 cats, Ryder. He's a certified cutie. And I can't wait to share some of my thoughts and experiences on today's topic. I also encourage everyone to share their thoughts and experiences in the comments below if you're watching on YouTube. I've been in the construction industry for almost 10 years, and I've never been in an office or on a work site where women make up even close to half of the team. As a teenager, deciding what I wanted to study in university and ultimately what career I wanted to pursue, the concept of male-dominated industries and inequality was foreign to me. I knew I was treated differently due to certain hobbies that I had, which weren't considered feminine, but I was too young to understand why and how it was impacting me. Growing up, I frequently experienced sexism, but I dismissed all these experiences as the norm and didn't expect anything better or different from people. These expectations, or lack thereof, continued a few years into my career, but then I started to experience things that were actually directly impacting me. Contractors on site would introduce themselves to my male undergraduate before me. I wasn't asked for my input during meetings. One time I gave my number to a traffic controller so he could notify me when the road closure was ready, and his colleague loudly made immature remarks. Just recently, someone from the client side questioned my experience with no reasoning. I ignorantly assumed that once I was in a professional setting, people would, act like professional adults who actually respected each other and were just here to get a job done. Unfortunately, that hasn't always been my experience. I would love to say that I don't expect bullshit from anyone, but unfortunately, that's just not the case. Sometimes I feel like if I stand too strong and too proud, I'll come across as too intense. And if I pick up on every little thing that I find offensive or that I think could offend someone else, I feel like they'll just get sick of hearing me talk and feel like I'm nagging them or just being overbearing, and that I expect too much from everyone. My goal is to eventually rise above these feelings. However, I just want everyone to know that it is okay not to be as vocal on the topic as you'd like. And as you gain confidence and build your network, you'll begin to feel more empowered to speak up. We all start from somewhere. Also, I personally would start to feel like if I'm calling every single thing out that impacts me, then I also have a responsibility to call out things that impact others, which I already do and I'll go into later. Like, I'm not saying just because something isn't impacting you that you shouldn't call someone out on it. But I mean specifically every little comment. Like, in the construction industry, there is a lot. It would just be too mentally draining for one person to handle. I don't know, maybe this is a bit of a privileged way of thinking. Despite being a part of a minority group within the construction industry, I'm just a woman. As in, I'm still white, cis, able-bodied woman. And I have the privileges associated with that. My disadvantages that I face, although still frustrating and upsetting and at times discriminatory or forms of harassment, it's not the worst that people face. And I think that even just me talking about it now upsets me because I know how hard I find it sometimes. I can't imagine how some other people also find it and what they've had to go through. I think that if I just took all that on, it would be too much and I would burn out and be bloody crying at work every day. And so I think I've just had to find this in between of accepting that the workplace isn't perfect right now and it's going to take a lot of work. I need to decide what battles I'm going to face in order to actually be there on the front line to help improve the construction industry, because I see it all the time and in other industries as well. The people who want change get exhausted and frustrated and just end up leaving because they're like, you know what, this is too much for me. No one else cares. I'm leaving. And I really don't want to do that. So I guess in order to look after my own mental capacity to take all this on, I've had to just take a step back and consider what I'm willing to accept and where I draw my line. And I understand how much of a privilege that is, that I'm able to take that step back and have a choice on the matter. I also want to stress that this is specific to me and it's not a simple thing. It's something that I've developed over years. So many things go into determining what boundaries I'm willing to make and how I choose I'm going to react when they're crossed. I consider things like the relationship I have with the person, the intent of what's been said, where they are when they say it, who's saying it and why. And, regardless, like if it's wrong, it's wrong. But sometimes in this industry, I found it's best to adjust your response depending on what you're doing or what's being said. To break this down, I've categorized the way I choose to react under 3 types of responses: visual, verbal, and lastly, escalation. Let's get straight into part 2, the visual response. Starting off with visual responses, let's say someone makes an inappropriate joke. I found if there are a few people around and it's been something that's just not really appropriate, but it wasn't made in any sort of malice or directly offending anyone, I simply don't laugh and make a disapproving face, and then I usually scoff or make a similar noise just to highlight that, you know what, that joke made me uncomfortable and it's not suitable. And I'm lucky enough that the people most of the time that I've worked with don't intend to put anyone down, and sometimes they don't even realize that what they've said could have been taken in a negative way. It's just quote unquote construction talk. So usually that response is suitable. There has been a time or two where jokes have been made where I've just literally stood up and walked away in response. Usually those situations where I decide to physically remove myself from the conversation are when I feel like I don't have the authority to speak up about what this person has said. The main situation that I'm currently thinking of is when someone from the client side had something inappropriate and I just didn't feel like I could call them out on it because of the relationship that you have with the client, which is shit, but at least I feel like my response of walking away was hopefully clear enough. And look, I know not everyone would agree with this, and honestly, in a perfect world, I wouldn't either. But at this point in my career, this is how I'm navigating this space. So these visual responses are reactions that demonstrate how someone's words or actions have made you feel. So you're making it known that you're uncomfortable or even disgusted without having to verbally say so. This could include certain facial expressions, shaking your head, scoffing, or, as I mentioned before, just completely walking away. Part 3, the verbal response. I think the verbal response is pretty self-explanatory, but as an example, I want to share an experience I had on a previous project. There's this person I used to work with, and he was a bit of a dickhead, honestly. Let's call him Steve. Steve was the sort of person who does the least amount of work possible while taking all the credit when things go well. He was also very big-headed and thought he knew better than everyone else. Anyway, one of the foremen really didn't like Steve, but whenever he would talk poorly of Steve, the foreman would make comments on Steve's sexuality. I had built a good relationship with this foreman, and so I would always call him out on it and remind him that Steve was just an asshole. It had nothing to do with his sexuality. Just call him an asshole. And the foreman was receptive to that and admitted that he shouldn't be speaking that way. So that was a bit of a breakthrough for me, and evidence that calling people out does actually help if done in the right way. I found that if you call this type of person out, someone similar to this foreman, in a respectful way, they'll usually understand where you're coming from and take it on board. But if you come at them with aggression, they'll just give you aggression right back, and that just honestly doesn't help anyone. Now, I think it's also important to acknowledge that sometimes the generic old white guy who's worked in construction all his life is honestly never going to change. It's so ingrained in them, and I think it can be a bit ignorant of us to expect them to adjust their ways. That's not to say stop calling it out and obviously escalate things to management when necessary, but don't be too hard on yourself if the conversations you have with them don't result in any change. I know this can be a bit disheartening, but I find if I let these sort of people impact me too much, I lose a lot of motivation to be proactive in the improvement of the industry's culture. Calling people out when they say something discriminatory is also so much easier when you have a good relationship with the person. And look, I'm not saying that if there's some guy who's just a freaking creep and inappropriate to become friends with them, like, no. I mean, depending on your position within the workplace, really prioritize just being present on site and in the office. Even just sitting in the lunchroom to eat your lunch. That's something I never used to do. I used to just go straight back to my desk because I didn't want to talk to anyone. I was like, I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to do a job. Like, don't talk to me. But I've found that over time, simple things like going to pre-starts in the morning or just walking around site and starting a conversation with people has really helped me build stronger relationships. And people are more likely to prioritize the things I ask of them or keep me in the loop. As an environmental advisor, when I start on a new project and I approach people, they start to freak out or dread what I'm about to ask of them, thinking they've done something wrong or I'm about to ask them to carry out some sort of environmental action. Building these relationships in the ways I've explained has helped me become more effective in my role because of the respect we've built between each other. This then also makes me feel more comfortable to highlight inappropriate language or actions because I've created a safe space and the words I say have more weight to them. Before we move on to the next part, here are some responses you can use if someone makes an inappropriate joke or comment. 1. Act like you don't understand and get them to elaborate. A lot of these sort of jokes are made without any consideration of what they actually mean. Majority of the time, once the person has to explain why the joke is supposed to be funny, they essentially end up explaining why it's inappropriate, which either educates them or makes them embarrassed, or both. This response can also be used when someone questions your experience or position. Number 2, say, "That's what you went with?" Or something one of my friends recommended is, "What a strange thing to say out loud." This will throw them off guard and give you the authority in the power dynamic. You don't need to give them anything other than that. Just let them ponder it. You can also take a page out of Rihanna's book and say, "Wow, how disappointing was that question?" And lastly, just walk away. It shows that the joke was not tolerated and you're not willing to be near them because of it. People make jokes for attention, so walking away makes it clear that the joke did not land. Ryder has just been a little flop. I hope him being here hasn't been too distracting on what I've been saying. Eh? Oh my gosh. Anyway, on to part 4, escalation. Now, unfortunately, there are times when a joke has been made or something has been said or done that is just completely inappropriate. Or you may just not feel comfortable calling it out on your own, but you believe something needs to be done about the situation. First of all, make sure you're across your company's policies for reporting these sorts of issues. If you aren't already, I recommend looking it up or asking someone. While follow the company policies is all good and fine advice, sometimes it's not that straightforward. So here are a couple of things I've found that has helped me. Once again, having good relationships with the right people is really important. This includes not only your manager, but also their manager. So the construction manager, project manager, or superintendent. Relationships with other managers can also be really helpful as well. As an example, I experienced a situation at work, which I won't elaborate on, that I felt may need to be escalated. Unfortunately, I didn't feel comfortable discussing it with my direct manager, and I wasn't sure whether it needed to be escalated further. So I went to the safety manager and discussed it with him. I was in a bit of a state, so he was then able to talk to the superintendent on my behalf, and then I met with the superintendent to discuss the issue. It's worth noting too that I also had a good relationship with the super, which made that discussion a lot easier. We were able to agree on a plan moving forward, and then the issue was eventually addressed. I've also found that writing an email to the person you want to escalate an issue of harassment or discrimination to can break the ice and get some specific points across before you meet. I don't go into detail in the email, just some dot points of what I want to discuss. This can be particularly helpful if you're someone who gets easily flustered, as it essentially sets an agenda for the meeting. I think it's also important for me to mention that this is just the way I've chosen to deal with these aspects of the construction culture. If you're a more confident and headstrong person than I, and you feel comfortable being more direct and consistent in calling people out, then absolutely continue doing that. Like, I would be honored to know you. But it's just not something I feel comfortable doing. And I think it's important to not be too harsh on yourself regarding that. My dad once said, only fight the battles that you can't afford to lose. Which, look, do I agree completely with that? No, not exactly. It's just that sometimes you do need to fight those sort of battles that may seem inconsequential. But ultimately, the concept is that sometimes you need to choose your battles wisely. And if something needs to be fought, then absolutely stand there, hold your ground, and say what needs to be said. But also identify when it's not, I guess, helpful or required. If you're enjoying the podcast, it would mean the world if you would share it with one of your friends that you think would enjoy it too. It would mean the world to Ryder as well, if you would share the podcast. What do you think, Ryder? He doesn't care. Now, I couldn't discuss this topic without also addressing the challenges. It's so necessary to acknowledge that even once you determine how you're willing and able to approach speaking up about inappropriate words or actions within the workplace, it can still be challenging as fuck and a massive mental load. Even though implementing these strategies have been effective at keeping me motivated to be in the industry, there have still been a couple of times where I've just ended up moving companies or moving projects, which, although not ideal, thankfully we're in an industry where that is possible. If you know you've done what you can and you can't see anything changing or improving, there are other options out there. In saying that, you still need a bit of resilience. And I hate saying that because I feel like it can sometimes be used as such a cop-out, but like you do. You need to just hold your ground sometimes and just see where things go. I almost left the company I'm currently working for, but thankfully I held out because I've now moved to another project within the same company, and I really like where I am now, and I really like where I see the company going. I've also created a good network around me with some great friends, including my wonderful husband outside of the workplace that I can have a vent to, and I've maintained a fantastic friendship with some of my past work colleagues who have become invaluable to getting me through the workday sometimes. Throughout my years in the industry, I have also come across some women who have been very privileged during their journey and career within the construction industry. They've never had to or felt pressured to prove themselves, or they're more accustomed to the construction culture and aren't as impacted by the odd sexist remarks here and there or being surrounded by men all the time, which, like, that's great for you. I don't want to take that away. But Don't then insert yourself into these conversations about harassment and discrimination and act like your truth is the only truth. I've witnessed interviews before where the women involved were like, oh, I haven't really experienced any disadvantages from being a woman. If you're confident and demand respect, then respect will come. Maybe that was your experience, but that's definitely not everyone's. And I think it's irresponsible and ignorant to give such a surface level advice and not acknowledge that your experience isn't indicative of the whole industry. It gives the perspective that those who are experiencing greater difficulty gaining the respect of their male peers are doing something wrong. Like, yes, if you're confident and respectful, it will help. But it's not the reason that we're struggling with equality. Why should I, as a woman, have to gain more confidence or be more demanding of respect than my male counterparts in order to be treated equally? The answer to increasing the amount of women in the workplace and battling sexism isn't be confident. In my experience, it's also a lot harder to find the confidence to call someone out or stand up for yourself, because I believe the level of confidence women require is greater than men due to the environment of the construction industry. Recently, during a pre-start, one of the leading hands essentially just out of nowhere targeted me directly in front of everyone and just went off about an issue that actually had nothing to do with me and was beyond my control. I was really shocked and caught off guard by this, and in the moment, I didn't know how to respond. An hour or two later, I had processed what had happened and worked up the courage to give him a call and said, I didn't appreciate the way you spoke to me during the pre-start. You could have taken me aside after and discussed it. I then explained why this thing was an issue and why it hadn't been done. If he had have just come to me and spoken about it rather than yelling at me in front of everyone, maybe we could have had that discussion earlier. Like, I'm here to help. Don't come for me. Let's come up with a solution together and get the right people involved. And that took so much to hype myself up and do that. And I was really proud of myself. But all of that isn't even my point. A few weeks later, during another pre-start, one of the guys was going off about something else and was doing so more generally, like not targeting anyone specifically. But one of the laborers just then and there stood up for himself in front of everyone with no hesitation. Like, I could never. And look, I'm sure there are plenty of men that also would not have been able to do that, but it just feels like a much safer place for men to react and speak up in that way than it does for women. Looking back on how I've evolved in the way I navigate construction, seeing what I've learned and put into practice and how it's influenced my workplace has been quite liberating and motivating. I've also gained the appetite to be more proactive in the path towards equity within the industry. A day at work is no longer just about showing up to site, putting in sediment and erosion controls, undertaking water quality testings, etc. For me, it's also about being a role model to other women, doing what I can to influence the workplace, to make it better for myself and others. It feels really good to know that I'm contributing to the improvement of the culture within the construction industry, even if it's just a small amount. It's also made me a stronger person. I finally have an understanding of what my value is, and I have the confidence to stand by that, regardless of what some people may think. Like, when the client questioned my experience, like, he actually doesn't know what he's talking about. And I didn't stand up for myself at the time because I was in a bit of shock, and neither did my manager, who was also there, and he definitely should have. But I don't hold it against anyone, except for maybe the client. It was a bit of a dick move, but it didn't upset me. I think that's the point I'm getting at. I know my value. I know my worth, and those I work directly with also know what my skills are and my abilities are, and I've proven it time and time again. What he said means nothing, and if he further questioned it, I would feel confident to stand up for myself, and I would also feel comfortable asking one of my managers to stand by me as well. So, what now? Well, everyone should put some time aside to determine what their boundaries are and what actions you'll take if one of those boundaries are crossed. So if someone says or does something that makes you uncomfortable, determine how you would like to see yourself respond. Sometimes you have to start off smaller than you'd like, or you might respond differently than you'd like when the situation actually presents itself to you. But as you build experience and have more conversations with a variety of people, you'll figure out what sort of situation elicits what sort of response. Continually reflecting on this and updating it as you and the industry progresses is also so valuable in successfully combating the bigoted culture within the construction industry as a woman.